Okay, I'm going to make a start now. You'll see from the screen that we're recording this webinar. So you'll be able to look back on it and also share it with your colleagues if anyone's missed it. So welcome to the first webinar for today. This is the second in a series of 4 that we've held. So we held one in February. So please look back on that if you want to. So welcome, and my name is Emma Adams. I'm an improvement consultant who works with various organisations around the country, and I've spent many years in health and social care working on improvement. So I'm one of your hosts, and our second host is Frances Wiseman. Frances, would you like to say hello?
Hello, my name's Frances Wiseman. I'm Deputy Director of Transformation at Portsmouth Hospitals Trust. And so I'll be working with Emma today to take all of you through these presentations and conversations.
Thanks, Frances. Now, Shah from the Q team is doing the good job. She's given us a wave. Hello, Shah. So Shah's going to do a great job of sorting us into breakout rooms and things like that and helping us with the tech. But with further ado, let me hand you over to our guests to just say hello and who they are. And I think I may have 2 out of the 3 guests online. I'll just check, I might have the 3rd. But first, let me please welcome Kim Barnes, who is calling all the way over from America. So it's early in the morning for her too. So Kim, would you mind saying hello and just giving us a quick, brief introduction?
Great. Good morning, good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me. It's an early morning for me, but not nearly as early as from Los Angeles. So look forward to our workshop today.
Thank you, Kim. And Russ, would you like to say hello?
Hi everyone, I'm Russ Jewell. I'm a partner at KPMG. I've got a clinical background, used to work in the NHS, and I've supported lots of organisations working with Kim in the UK on their quality improvement journeys.
Fantastic. Now our 3rd speaker is Dr Andy Heeps, who I don't think has joined the call yet. So we'll introduce him when he has. Hopefully he'll be with us fairly soon. But he's the interim chief executive of West Sussex University Hospital Sussex. So he'll join us later. So without further ado, let me share my screen and take us through our presentation. And if you haven't said hello yet, please do say hello on the chat and tell us where you're from. So great. So welcome to this webinar. As I said, it's the 2nd out of a series of 4 on quality management systems. And today we're going to be putting the man on the moon. So we're going to be looking at what will it take to align people within your organization to your strategy and to really make sure that quality is at the center of what your organization does. So these are our guests, so I've already introduced to you, and as I say, Andy will be joining us shortly. I'm sure he'll say hello then. So today, just to let you know how we're running things, so we'd like you to be on mute while we present the core material, just so that we don't get any background noise in place. The chat's open throughout, so please say hello, say who you are, throw us any questions through the chat, and we'll do our best to keep an eye on it. And then what we'll do is we'll hold a discussion panel towards the end where you'll get a chance to pose a question to the speakers if you want. And we'll keep an eye as we go. Don't worry if your tech fails, because as I say, we're recording, so you can look back on it later. And we'll also share any resources that are referred to during the webinar with you. We also like to use Twitter a lot, so we've got a hashtag for QCOMQMS if you wanted to use that, and please tag the Q community as well as you're doing it, and don't worry if things interrupt or whatever. We're all used to this now, aren't we? So if the window cleaner comes, which is usually what happens to me, we don't mind if you have to deal with that, and we'll save our chat as well so that we can pick up some themes as we go along. So just to let you know, in terms of our format, so we start with a brief outline of why we're doing this series. I'll hand you over to Kim, first of all, to talk about aligning to strategy. Then I'll hand you to Russ, who's going to talk about developing the conditions for success, building on his experience with a number of organisations. We'll have a brief breakout where you can say hello to people in the the Zoom call, and then we'll hand you to Andy, and then Francis will take a short panel discussion, and then we'll close. So that's how we're going to do things. So just to give you a little bit of a background as to why we're doing this. So myself and my fellow Q member, a lady called Joy Furnival, have had all sorts of conversations about improvement and quality improvement. And we were asking ourselves a question about why do we spend a lot of effort on improvement and find often that it's not sustained? Why does it, despite all our best efforts, end up reverting back to how we were, or not fixing the problem that we thought we tried to solve? So we have explored through some of our own sort of studies and our work, quality management systems. So this is about bringing together both quality improvement alongside some other approaches around quality control and quality planning, to create a whole management system whereby quality is at the centre of the organisation. So we've had an introductory webinar on this last year where we started to explore this, and we found lots of people were very interested in this. And so we approached the Health Foundation to say, could we do some more? Could we do some deeper dive masterclasses if possible, to take each part of a quality management system and think, well, what is it? What does this really mean? And how would this apply to some of the things we're trying to do in health and care? And thankfully, they've sponsored us to do this, and we're really grateful. And so what we've done is we've designed a series of 4 webinars. And each of those, we've been really lucky to have some great people come along and share their experience, which is very much the ethos of the Q community. So our first webinar was in February, and the recordings are on the Q Health website if you wanted to have a look. And we looked very much at an organisational level around quality management. So how do you start deliberately planning to deliver the quality that your customers, patients, consumers, whatever term you want to use, expect? And today's webinar is the second one, which is around how do we start to align people to strategy so that quality is central to the organisational priorities. The third one will be on the 25th of May, and that will be around how do we make it a daily reality? So how do we take quality and put it into a control system that we can see day to day? And then the fourth webinar will be really thinking about how do we lead? What are the cultural conditions, the relational conditions that we need to get really good at leading for quality? So they're the 4 series. You can find them on the Q website if you want to have a look and book in, and they have been open to all. So if you're not a member of the community, it doesn't matter, you're welcome to come along. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand control over to Kim, and Kim's going to take us through our an overview of some of the work she's done at Catalysis, where she's leading a network of education and leadership development with multiple organisations across the country based on her own previous experience of working with feeder care. So I'll let you say more, Kim. I'll just hand the baton over to you.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Emma. This is actually the hardest part for me, is making sure the button works. So let's see if I can advance the slides. Voila. So I want to talk a little bit about who I am, why I do this, and use my previous experience as the president and CEO of the hospital division at Theta Care as the example. So just a little history was in about 2003, my colleague, John Toussaint, who's a physician and was the CEO of our integrated system, decided that we were going to go on a lean journey. And that was a command and control, a top-down decision, but everything after that really took to heart the lean principles of building our system so that we could sustain the work. So what he did was he took all of us and put us on a bus, and he drove us to a little town about 30 miles west of Appleton, Wisconsin. And we went to the Aaron's Snow Thrower Factory. And we watched them do quality improvement in a lawnmower snowblower factory. And most of us were looking at each other thinking, he's lost his mind. We're not sure how this is actually going to work. But what we did see was some application. And most of us saw the first applications in the lab or in radiology, but it was hard for us to imagine it in an inpatient unit. It wasn't hard for John. As a physician, John felt very strongly that even though we were the lowest cost system in Wisconsin, and we were in the top quartile or decile for quality, that was not good enough. And what he kept saying to us is, where we're at as a country is equivalent to crashing a 747 every other day. How can we possibly say this is enough? And as you'll recall, we were members of IHI. This was also about the time they started talking about their 100,000 Lives campaign, that we were, you know, as John would put it, we were killing people. We were killing at least 100,000 people a year with medical errors, you know, med errors. So we were very deeply looking at programs around quality and how do we improve that. We looked at things called LEAP and things called, you know, we looked at IHI processes, we joined IHI, and we recognized that IHI was an awesome resource and that got us to the what, but it didn't get us the how. How do we deliver these processes? So one of our board members was the CEO from the snowblower factory, and he offered to use his consultants to come in and help teach us the lean principles, and that was Simpler. So many of you probably have experiences with Simpler, and we had a pretty positive one. They came to Theta Care. We met with them several times, and we decided we were going to go on this journey with them, and we committed to a 3-year contract. What they told us was they'd never worked in healthcare, so we were going to be their first healthcare contract. And at the same time, you saw Virginia Mason go on this journey, and another organization in Minnesota called Park Nicolet, and we all approached it slightly differently. Park Nicolet really focused on their building projects, and Virginia Mason, as you know, focused a lot on value streams, and so did we as we started this journey. So we had 16 enterprise-wide value streams that crossed all of these areas. So as an integrated system, we had 7 hospitals. These were our 2 flagship hospitals, and I was the president of both of these. We had 32 primary care clinics. We had behavioral health, mental health. We had home care. We had employee health. We had a skilled nursing facility and a senior living facility. So we were fully integrated for a community our size, which was about 250,000 people. So as we went on this journey, we made the decision to take 16 enterprise-wide value streams. We hired 30 process improvement facilitators. And when I say hired, we hired them from within. We promoted people from within, and we brought about 5 people in that were experts externally. And then we had Simpler on site with us pretty much for 3 years. As we did this, if you've worked with them, you know the pace is you do a very extensive value stream map, then you look at where your opportunities for improvement are, and you begin working those as Kaizen events or rapid improvement events or projects, whatever term you use. And after about 2 years, my teams in the hospitals were saying, wait a minute, we can't keep going this fast. We're not sustaining what we're doing. This is overwhelming to us. And so we stopped. John was very good at listening to our employees, and we stopped and we PDSA'd it. We studied and adjusted. We narrowed it down to 4 value streams. And I took a group of people offline for about a year to look at how do we build a management system built around quality, lean tools, and process improvement, and our people, our human development, our human assets. And so as we did that, we built systems. And so I heard Emma a little while ago talking about how the system needs to be built around quality. And I'm a firm believer that, you know, you can't will change, you can't will sustain it, you have to build a system around it to get it. So, all right, I'm gonna make this slide move, and that was the wrong one. Go back one. So the first thing we built was our strategy deployment process. And I now call that an executive management system because there's more to it than what we learned from Simpler. Strategy deployment is taking this strategic plan over here, identifying those breakthrough initiatives, and building visual management and processes around cascading that work. But what we also learned was you can't ignore the operational side of the business. So how do you also deploy those key operational strategies and as Russ will talk about, those corporate opportunities, so that you're not just focused on strategy as an executive team, you have to focus on operations as much as strategy. So we spent a lot of time working on our vision, mission, and our principles and behaviors. And we at that time had 2 PhD organizational development folks on our team, and they actually did a human development value stream. So as we developed any system, they were involved in it. So it was operations, it was the PI team, improvement team, and quality, and it was human resources, because it was so important that those things balance as you move forward. So we worked on that a lot, and we revisited it every year until we got it right, because you never get it right the first time. And so with that, we learned from Simpler and from many others now, when you look at the research, having those what we call true north metrics, other people call pillars, but they're those vital few measures that help us know whether we're winning or losing as an organization, and are we keeping our customer at the center. So when we built True North measures, it was really around always the patient first. So looking at patient safety, patient outcomes, our staff engagement, and our finances. So we will often see quality and safety bundled together, sometimes separated, but the whole purpose of our going on this journey was to improve and sustain quality. So our True North metrics really focused on this. And then from those net metrics, we took our strategic plan and we identified, out of the 250 initiatives that we had identified in our strategic plan, what are the few that we can work on an annual basis, and we cascaded those. So I'm not going to get into a lot of detail around strategy deployment because I don't want to steal Russ's thunder, but just to know that the first element of the management system at the executive level was strategy deployment, and that allowed us to build systems below that connected to the do no harm, harm-free care, improving quality at the source. And that was a critical decision that we made early on. On this other side, we also recognize there are things that you still have to do. At that time, we were building a hybrid OR, and that wasn't part of our strategy. It was part of operations, but it took a lot of resources. And we were implementing, we were the beta site for Epic, so we were implementing a new EMR. Takes a lot of resources. We built a new hospital. Takes a lot of resources. Wasn't strategy, but we had to recognize that we had to, the people doing this work are the same people. So our goal was to keep 20% of the work around strategy and 80% around business, and cascade them in a way that the front line, through our lean management system, could see, have visual transparency to what were our top strategies. Are we driving True North, and could they actually tell us what our True North were? And then what are our biggest operational goals? And then how do they at the front line connect to that? So an example would be in a do no harm or a harm-free care, we had a problem with sepsis. And so we didn't have a problem with sepsis everywhere in the organization, but where we did, they worked on sepsis. So the ED took sepsis as a top priority, and so did the ICU. Other areas took, diabetic care in our primary care clinics. So it allowed everybody to connect and know how their work at the front line every day made a difference to the system, to their unit, the system, the hospital, and the community. And that was critical. Our engagement scores really skyrocketed after the first year of the management system because people could see how they were connected. All right. So this is just another way of looking at it. We had our strategy deployment going here, and we looked at when we as a leadership team made a decision to deploy something, how did that in fact impact the whole system? And we recognized through this slide that every time we made a decision, we started with what we called an A3 or a project plan at the executive level. Then we deployed it to the directorate or the management level, and they broke it down into 3 or 4 more pieces, and then they sent it to the front line and they broke it down into 5 or 6 more pieces, and pretty soon you can see you've got so much going on and you can't understand whether your resources can actually attack that as well as you want it to. So we recognize that the true north allowed us to focus on the vital few, and our goal was to get it down to 6 areas that each area tied to true north on each unit in a visual management way to see both strategy and operations from the executive level. And then we left a sixth role, a sixth column or area for something that was just specific to your unit that may not try to true north, because people still have things they need to do in the work. So we put that visual management in place, and we called it an area improvement center. And so on one side of it, we did huddles where we looked at daily continuous improvement. The other side was on a weekly basis, how are we doing and achieving these other goals? So the front line could see daily, weekly, monthly, are we making a difference, and are we driving improvement, and especially in quality and in our people? We then built a management system, and I'm not going to go into detail here, but I put it together as a puzzle because it is a system and it is interlocking, and it really has to do with 3 things. Do you understand what's happening today? Do you understand what your top problems are and how you're going to solve them? Are you reporting and making visual your reports? And do you have standards or standard work around these processes that can be used to train others? That system took us a year to put in place and was very powerful. Within that system was a cascade of meetings. So if you look at the bottom of this meeting, it's a monthly meeting that happens at the unit level where they go through what's happening in their metrics. When they're not achieving goal, they create a countermeasures summary that they present. The manager of that unit then takes those countermeasure summaries to the directorate meetings and says, here's how we're doing on our metrics. So you're now seeing the golden thread starting at the front line, moving to the directorates, coming to the hospital level with countermeasures so that you can understand at the system level where everybody's at, drilling down to the unit. So if you're working on harm, how are we doing? If 27 units are hitting the target and 3 are not, why are they not? How can we remove barriers? How can we help them? So it really was effective, and we saw great results. So when we were doing value streams alone, we were seeing 40 to 60% improvement, but we saw a plateau and decline. Now we were sustaining those improvements, and we had our daily continuous improvement working through the huddle boards where our goal was 2 to 3% improvement over the year. So, and then the other side of this is how we managed operations. Was we put a work weight process in so that we could see how our capacity was being utilized, so that we weren't overburdening. You know, one of the major wastes in an organization is overburdening your staff. So this just talks about the processes that tie both sides of that together from the executive level, but it also brings in that you've got to have that system beneath the executives to catch the work, track the work, commit to the work, because they're the doers. And so they have to be able to give feedback, and I'll talk about that in a minute, give feedback to those above them so that we know what's going on. We're playing that catch-ball game of having the right measures with the right timing. Oops. This just is the slide I like to use with strategy deployment. It's what I talked about a minute ago. You have your strategic plan. They deploy to breakthrough objectives. What are those key elements? Here's an example of a cancer unit, a care team redesign unit, which was from IHI, brand promise. We were changing our name, and we wanted to get our physicians aligned from primary care into the organization. So those areas all set up 2 or 3 goals, and the vice president or the director owned it, and then they deployed it to the next level, and they took those 2 or 3 goals and operationalized it for their portfolio. And then the portfolios divided up into units, and they developed the cross-functional teams that could actually deliver that. So we actually, I know Russ is going to talk in detail about this, but I wanted you to know we did this at ThedaCare. It worked incredibly well in creating that alignment from boardroom to the front line to the patient. My last slide here is going to talk a bit about how we communicated. And so, you know, we've got the management system, and I've identified here on the right all of the elements in the management system and how it works at every level. And of course, we have more levels in here than your organization probably has, but we use this with so many people, we want to be sure that we understand it. So you put the staff at the top because they are the ones who do the work. They really know the business. I remember as a president coming in and solving problems where I shouldn't have been solving that problem because I didn't have enough information, but I thought it was my job. So they would say, hey, this is my problem. And I would say, hey, I've got the answer for that. We're going to do it this way. And then a month later, I'd realize, oh my God, that was stupid. So instead of doing that, we're now playing catch-ball and listening to people at the front line, and they're reporting through a daily discussion, the status of the business. They're doing the continuous improvement, making those changes at the unit level that makes a difference in those true north. They're looking at the metrics, and they can tell you what's happening in their unit and across the system, and they're escalating problems. In our process was, if you couldn't solve a safety problem within 15 minutes, you had to escalate it to the next level. And ultimately it could come to me to produce the resources to solve that problem. But this escalation process and the communication strategy we developed here was essential for, again, sustainment and continuous improvement. The role of the executives then changed. And so we became teachers and coaches rather than tellers and doers. And so our goal was to get into these areas every week and talk to people about our strategies, our true north, how we're doing, so as to communicate the strategy, goals, and targets, and do that with purpose and by defining behaviors that were not command and control. They were asking questions, listening to answers, looking for solutions with the front line and with our leaders. So the role changed from, again, telling to teaching, getting out of their office at least a couple times a week and going and observing a process and asking questions about it, so they actually understood why we had a quality failure. And then again, connecting with them to remove barriers that are a problem in achieving the goals, communicating the true north, and communicating other things. The other big purpose of the leaders going to the Gemba is to celebrate the great work that's happening at the frontline level. We don't see it when we're sitting in our boardroom, we hear about it, but it doesn't sink in. Getting out there and seeing it changes how we lead, and it changes the commitment of our staff to support and move forward with really more brilliant ideas than we would ever come up with from the boardroom. All right. So that was us in a nutshell. Apologize for talking so fast, but 15 minutes goes by really quickly. So at this point, I'm going to hand this back over to Emma, who I think will introduce Russ.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kim. Now, my mind is already buzzing, and I'm sure everyone else listening is too. So what we're going to ask you to do is just hold on your questions until we get to the panel discussion, but please put them in the chat so other people can see where your mind's going, what you're thinking about, and we'll have a little breakout as well, so you can share that with some of your colleagues. But when we come back to the panel discussion that Francis will facilitate, if you've got a burning question, then we'll try and pick it up. And if not, we'll see if we can find some resources or something that can sort of follow in that. So all our speakers will have a look at the chat as it's coming along. So as your brain is buzzing, which mine definitely is now, then, go ahead and put some questions in. So I'm going to go back to my screen now, but I'll hand control over to Russ. And so Russ is going to lead us through his presentation. Sorry, Russ, I'm nearly there. And I'll put you on, you're in the driving seat. So Russ, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit more and take us through your presentation?
Thanks, Anna. And I'm now intimidated by the fact that Kim managed to nail 15 minutes absolutely to the minute, which is something that I am worried that I will spectacularly fail at. So please give me a nudge if I'm going on too long.
I'll wave at you, Russ, if you need it.
Give me a red light or something. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Russ, as I said at the start. I'm a partner at KPMG, and I feel genuinely kind of privileged to get the chance to work with Kim on a weekly, if not daily basis sometimes. So I get to kind of benefit from the learning that she's had and that Catalysis have generated across the network. My kind of experience with this as an approach goes back a number of years, sort of reflecting that there had to be a better way to do improvements in hospitals. I'm a clinician by background, and sort of having the opportunity to work across a number of different health organisations, saw the same challenges being faced. Had a look around. Actually, our Canadian firm had been working with Kim and Catalysis on a number of organisations in North America and Canada, and we thought absolutely that is what organisations in the NHS need. We were at the time lucky enough to be working with Western Sussex on some kind of other improvement projects, and spoke with Marianne and the team around this as an approach, and this was something that they were looking to do. We started our journey in the UK with Kim and the team working alongside Kim in our Canadian practice in Western Sussex about 6-7 years ago now, and it's just been a privilege to get the chance to work alongside such amazing leaders and such amazing people along the way. And there are a number of you on the phone here today that I've had the good fortune to spend time with and to learn from as well. So what that has given us, and what that's given me in particular, is the experience of having been through a number of different organisations, starting from the beginning. The first conversation being, did you know there is a different way to run an organisation? Let's actually understand what that means, and then how do we start to kind of incrementally create those right conditions for success? Because what we are trying to do is fundamentally change how someone thinks about the way that they lead the organisation, the way that they manage and kind of coordinate and drive improvement through the organisation and to engage the frontline teams. So those are very hard yards for people to do, and it's very challenging. So if I just take a step back though, actually, again, there's a lot to this, but actually fundamentally, what do we want to achieve, and why is strategy deployment, or why is cascading strategy important? Because we're all comfortable, I think, from a QI point of view with point one here. We want every single member of staff in the organisation to be able to come to work every day to deliver great care and also improve how I do it. That's sort of one of the kind of fundamental principles, isn't it, around what we want to be able to achieve. What we also though want to do, and our kind of experience is that, and Kim alluded to it as well, is that's all well and good, but actually we run the risk of having a sort of 1,000 flowers blooming if it's not actually kind of pointed at a particular direction, if it's not working on the things that are most important to our patients and our staff and our organisation overall. So, and if we don't get that purpose behind it, what we see is that eventually it kind of loses momentum and starts to slip backwards again. And what we want to do is sustain it and to build on the improvements that we're able to make. So we absolutely want every single member of staff to come to work every day to deliver great care and improve how they do it. But we also want them to understand what is important to our patients and to the organisation overall. And actually what the individual's role is and the team's role is in really trying to kind of help take us there to improve care for our patients. What are the biggest things that we need to be working on that our team can help? And Kim gave a couple of great examples around sepsis, for example. So absolutely focus on improvements in your area, but we'd also like your help on tackling some of these really bigger issues that we see causing our patients problems. And so the way to do that is we also want our teams to feel supported and connected through the management routines and behaviours to deliver improvements. So that golden thread that kind of runs up and down, that closed loop, that learning system through the organisation to be able to help support things, to connect the board right down to those frontline teams. And Kim gave us some really great examples of the way that they did that at Theta Care. And I think the first point to land is, and again, I know I'm preaching to the converted here, but transformation is more than a series of projects. This is fundamentally a different way of behaving, a different way of leading, and a different way of running your organisation. It is not something that starts and stops. So that's dead easy. That's all we want to achieve. So that's no problem at all. So why do we find it hard? Well, this was quite therapeutic for me to write this slide, because this was something that I had observed across a number of organisations, both very high performing and also some more kind of challenged and distressed. And I think it kind of illustrates the value of being clear on what strategy is and why it's important, because all too often what we find is in any complicated organisation is that there are just too many strategies and goals. So there are lots of important things. There will always be lots of important things, now more so than ever. But we're overwhelming, and again, Kim mentioned overburdening our teams, because so actually when you have so many things that are important, actually nothing becomes important. It's all a priority. What that means is that kind of that golden thread from the senior team down to the front line gets eroded. And also there tends to be a behavior that we observe around leaders feeling compelled to give the answers to problems rather than kind of enabling the level below them to solve the problems. When you've got so many priorities, actually, how do we measure them? How do we get those kind of learning loops? And so we end up with responsibility for improvement really being kind of held at the top of the organization rather than enabling the tiers below. What that means is, and I think genuinely, being a middle manager in a hospital is probably the toughest gig in the NHS. It's a really tough role to do. That if you become overburdened, firefighting is absolutely the norm. A kind of a cyclical focus on actions rather than root causes. So kind of not having the time to reflect and be able to kind of focus on actually what's the cause. And as a result, we end up with this sort of bottleneck. And again, we kind of end up isolating the leadership from the front line because there's just the middle tiers are just overwhelmed within the organisation, which drives a lack of standardisation on the front line, variations in performance, and disempowered frontline staff because we're just not getting that clear signal coming from the top to bottom, and it's really hard to get this right. And I think I'll also pause here to kind of say that again, the context we're talking about here, often we sort of default to hospitals. But actually, if we think it's hard in a hospital, let's just, as we go through today, reflect on what it might mean for an ICS or an ICB. Because if we think hospitals are complicated, ICSs are another level again. So the importance of that alignment, the importance of that clarity from top to bottom is absolutely critical. And I think one of the things that we need to really make sure we get right in the UK as we start to move towards more integrated ways of working. So we kind of express that a different way, and we sort of start with kind of what are the symptoms of that on the left-hand side. We've got a lot of time spent on firefighting, and a big part of that is the kind of consequence of this overburdening. So too many large projects and kind of being held too low in the organisation, and too much volume just kind of overwhelms our teams. And so we need to try to get to the point where we are actually, and it's very hard, but we're starting to reduce the number of priorities that we have so that we can create that alignment, we can create that focus within the organization. So how do we reduce the number of big projects that we're working on, big programs of work, and the biggest ones are kind of held at the top. But then how do we kind of enable the front line to really drive improvements on a daily basis? So how do we access all of these green dots, which is our kind of improvement engine to help move us towards our strategy? And that's Kim's point around the kind of big rocks and the smaller parts. How do we make sure all of that is working in concert to kind of move us forward as an organization? One of the key parts of this, and this is taken from Kim and Catalysis and the Shingo Institute, is thinking about in order to get the conditions right, we need to think about this in the round. So too often we think about results and tools, and we sort of oscillate between the two. So, oh well, we need an improvement event, we need to do some lean training, we need a PMO, and so we kind of bounce between results and tools. What we need to think about in order to create the right conditions for success is to go the other way around this loop. We need to start with thinking about what are the principles and the supporting behaviors that we want to demonstrate and we want to drive through the organization. That is absolutely the first part that we go to. Then, as we move clockwise rounds, what therefore are the systems and the processes and the routines that we need in place in order to best support those behaviors that we want to have? So it acts as in a kind of symbiotic way of that the systems need to be the crutch and the support that we want in order to support the behaviors that we want to demonstrate that are aligned to the principles. And then, of course, the systems are made up of tools as well. And it's only by addressing all four of these together when we make a change, thinking systemically about how we do it, is how then we start to move the culture of the organisation to one of continuous improvement. We need to think about these together. And again, and it's quite nice because Kim, you used one of our slides, or my slides earlier, and I'm now using one of yours here. So that shows that we worked together too long, I think. So this is a great slide that I love from Kim and Catalysis, which starts to break that down a bit more. So actually, and again, I think these are the Shingo principles down the left. So what is it that we're trying to achieve here? And then I really like the way that it's broken down in terms of actually how does that translate into behaviours through the organisation? If we're thinking about strategy deployment, we need to get alignment, which is this top box here. So there's an absolute focus, as Kim described, on creating value for the patient, but also a constancy of purpose, not kind of flicking between different priorities, but actually really kind of having a consistent and concerted effort on the highest priority areas, and thinking systemically about how we address these issues, rather than seeing them as isolated point solutions. How do we think systemically about how do we do it? And if we get that right, then as a leader, we're starting to develop a vision and strategies. We set reasonable targets that can be delivered, and we're really clear on the direction and communicating that on a regular basis. I won't talk to the bottom box because I think those are well understood from like the Q community in terms of how we do improvement, the kind of principles behind improvement. But I think the middle one, or rather the top two, are additional and important. So the aligned principles and the enable ones. So again, as a leader, how do we lead with humility? Because if we think we know the answers to everything, then we're not going to access all of the problem solvers that we have in our organization. How do we make sure that we absolutely respect the individual, and that we understand that we're focused on improving the processes within the organization, and having a constant desire and requirement and need to learn continuously. So how do we constantly improve how we're doing things? So again, we as executives, as improvement leaders, as frontline teams, are coming to work every day to deliver great care and to improve the way that we deliver care every day. In terms of how we need to get that in place, this is something that we think through a lot. And actually, we came to this when we were working with Western Sussex, and they were going to start taking on Brighton. We sort of took a step back and thought, well, we know it works in a Western Sussex type environment, but how will that be different as we go into a different organisation? And so we actually distilled it all down to the ability for leadership to commit to this journey is the fundamental thing that we need to make sure collectively we get in place in order for this to be successful. So if I kind of spin around that, there are some sort of soft and hard things within that. So number one is willingness. So that is leaders recognizing that actually change is required both for them as individuals and themselves as and the organization. So the status quo is not going to get us where we want to. We have to, and that's an uncomfortable thing for leaders to kind of reflect on and be willing to go on, but that's important. Second one is commitment. So absolute clarity of purpose, really committing to this as a journey, and kind of committing to the fact that they are going to have to change the way that they run things and to the approach, and that's challenging when you haven't done it before. It's a scary place to be. Ability to focus has never been harder right now, but making sure that we're not going to get compromised or kind of knocked off course by programs outside of the scope of the control. So actually, can we as a leadership team focus on this and give it the energy and time that it needs to be successful? In terms of sort of staying power and stability, I'll take together just in terms of this is around developing our way that we run the organization. So it takes time, and we need to have a stable leadership team in place in order to do it. And in order to do that as well, we need permission both from the board, the staff, the regulator, and also the organization as a whole in order to go on a journey like this. So it's not entirely sort of comprehensive, but I think in terms of sort of some of the sort of key things that we would look at when we're starting to talk to an organization around if these aren't in place, these are the types of things that we need to make sure we can collectively get in place if you are going to have the headspace, the capacity, and the energy to be able to really embark on a journey like this and really kind of make the types of things that Kim was describing part of the way that you do things, rather than something that sits alongside it. Ooh, a sneaky little transition got in there. Yeah, got it. Last slides. So again, some reflections on some common pitfalls that we see, and you'll have all been across these. And Kim mentioned some of them. So Kim mentioned around sort of hitting the wall, where if we're just focused on projects without thinking about how it embeds in our management routines and our daily work, then we're only ever going to take this so far. This one I think is really, really important, and it's probably the hardest thing for people to focus on, is the old system defeats the new system. So there is an old way of doing things, or a current way of doing things, and what we're trying to do is introduce new behaviours, systems, and routines. And there is a very natural and human tendency to hang on to the thing that we've been doing before. And so stepping away from that is the hardest thing, but the most important thing, because otherwise all of the old ways of working, all the old routines and behaviours are going to eventually kind of unintentionally attack and corrode the improvements that we're looking to try and make. So how do we kind of really make sure that we step across into the new system? So that's just a little bit around the how do we start to think about creating the right conditions for success in order to make that strategy deployment journey a successful one in an organisation. Back to you, Emma.
Thank you so much, Russ. Thank you for that. That was really fascinating, and I definitely identified with the lady, the Wonder Woman on the slide, as a middle manager having to fight everything. So there was loads in there actually to have a good think about. So what we're going to do now is we're going to put you in some breakout rooms, which some of you may sigh about, but others won't. But it's your chance to have a chat with other people, to meet some people who are in improvement like you, and to pick up some of the things that you might have been starting to think about as you hear those conversations. So there's two things we'd like you to do. One is to say hello, and the other is to capture what are you thinking, and what are the things that are starting to bubble up for you once you've started to see this. And please use the chat to put those in. We will go into a breakout room of our own, and we'll have a look at the chat and see what the sort of things you're starting to question us about. And then we'll bring you back in 15 minutes time, just to gather your thoughts, and that'll take us into Andy's presentation and then into a panel discussion where we'll hopefully pose some of your questions to our panel. So thanks very much to Russ. And I'm going to ask Charlotte if you'd mind doing the magic bit that puts everybody into breakouts. That would be lovely. Thank you.
That's everybody back, Emma.
Thank you, Charlotte. So we've lost a few. Isn't that always the case? But never mind. I hope you've had a good chat in your rooms. We had a good little chat as well. Really interesting stuff that's come through the chat. If there's anything you want to post in just while we're going through Andy's presentation, that'd be helpful, and then we can prepare for the group discussion. But I hope you also got a chance to meet some other people with similar interests to you. And I've hopefully made some connections as well. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand us over to Andy Heeps, who's joined us from University Hospitals Sussex. And Andy, you could probably do a little bit of a introduction to yourself if you don't mind. And I will share the screen, and then I will give you control over. Okay, so you can be in the driving seat. Let me just move us on. So Andy, it's all over to you. If you want to move the slides on, you go down to the bottom of the screen. Okay.
Yep. Great. All right. Well, thank you, Emma, and thank you for inviting me along. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Andy Heeps. I'm the interim chief exec at University Hospitals Sussex. It's a great pleasure to come and talk to you all today. It's nice to see some familiar faces, some familiar names in the list as well. So hello, Aklak. Hope you're all right. What I want to do today is talk a little bit about my journey through quality improvement and strategy deployment, and two organisations where I have taken part in actually using this, and to give sort of some of my reflections and some of my learning. So just about me, my background, I'm a consultant obstetrician and gynaecologist. I was at BHRUT, which is a trust in East London, which is where I work with ACLAC, and while I was there, I took part in the Generation Q programme, where I did my master's in quality improvement. Really got interested in lean improvement methodologies, work we were doing with Virginia Mason, and around that time BHRUT became partner trust with Virginia Mason and started to implement some lean improvement tools. The thing that really occurred to me there was, though, that it was just the tools. We weren't lining the tools up in any way, so the improvements were localized, but they weren't sticking. I then sort of moved on to North Middlesex Hospital as Chief Operating Officer, and took on the responsibility for QI, because I do have a bit of a view that if it just sits as a medical director's responsibility, it just feels a bit doctory, and it has to be everybody's gig. And actually, it's a way of improving ops. You're improving your operational processes through QI as much as quality. And then last year, moved to University Hospital Sussex as the Deputy Chief Exec. Marianne has retired. George Finley's coming back later this year. I'm interim Chief Exec until that happens, just beyond the merger of Western and BSUH. So seen this through a number of lenses. Start with a few reflections. If you look across the NHS, both outstanding and inadequate organisations tend to have the same strategies. There is nothing inherent in an outstanding organisation strategy that makes it outstanding. So it's not the strategy itself that's the problem or the solution. A focused bit of improvement work might get you to a goal briefly, but will it stick? Kim sort of talked about the high of a quick improvement, but does it stay? I'll just get this improvement, I'll be happy. It sort of occurs to me that quality improvement should be like playing sport or a musical instrument. The long-term joy comes from the playing, not from the individual achievements. And so the way you then deploy your strategy and your playing of your musical instrument is key to the way you achieve. So similarly to one of Russ's diagrams, traditional objective setting in the NHS, the board starts setting off the high-level plan. It cascades down the organisation. By the time it hits frontline staff, it looks completely different because of the way it's been sold locally. And there's a dozen competing priorities that come in from the side that knock people off both locally and nationally. There's no real structure for the way objectives get cascaded down through organisations. Do you do it with someone's appraisal? How can you actually line doctors up around setting objectives through? What is that golden thread that takes you from that strategy at the top of the organisation? So it occurs to me that if you're 1 degree off a route that you're supposed to be on, after 100 yards, you'll be 5 feet off. But after a mile, you'll be 92 feet off. And I think this for me is about making sure that that lines up. It doesn't take being off by much to be quite far apart after quite a short time. And that's, I think, where the concept of True North hits. So when I got to North Mid, it was an organisation in a bit of distress, which I have tried to display here. These were the priorities facing the executive team. ED performance was going off, FFT results weren't great, incidents were rising, our staff survey result wasn't very good. We had a digital challenge to get through, mandatory training figures were going off. People will recognise these challenges, and as an executive team, we were constantly being told by our teams and our divisions, you just need to prioritise for us, we can't do everything. And it just set me thinking back to looking at the work that Virginia Mason did and thinking about, well, actually, when you walk around, if you're lucky enough to go to Seattle, I remember going to the goods incoming department at Virginia Mason, and the guy said to me, do you know why I wear this hairnet? I have no idea why you wear the hairnet. He said, because we're all doing the infection control breakthrough objective that's come through from the board. And it felt a little bit like a sort of well, you knew we were coming around and going to do the sort of how do you put a man on the moon comment, but actually it was true. There was a really clear set of objectives that he could show me that lined up with the objectives that were set out by the board. And so given that Western Sussex had so successfully gone down that line, and I knew George from Generation Q days, we picked up the phone and said, can we come and have a look and see what you're doing? And we did a few sessions, and what we really wanted was less the improvement tools and more, how are you lining up your priorities? Because we just need to give our teams a chance to actually get on with some proper improvement work. And having done a few conversations, we ended up in a conference room at White Hart Lane. I don't think it's called White Hart Lane anymore, but whatever the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium's called now. And I think, Jem, you asked a question about how difficult was it to get your strategy discussion right. But with Marianne and Pete Landstrom, the strategy director from Western, in the room, we spent 8 hours talking about all of our strategic priorities and lining them up into these 5 buckets, which would become our true norths. So having it was, it was the best bit of exec development I think I've ever done. far better than getting professional teams in, because we were really having honest conversations with each other about what really was a priority and what wasn't. And I think the most important thing about this for me was that these strap lines to these true norths were really important. And Marianne kept saying to us, each of these words means something. These aren't just throwaway words, they mean something. So what do they mean? Because that will drive where your improvement effort can go. And so I just want to touch on the people true north that was in the middle. So our people are engaged, resilient, and inclusive, and will always strive to improve. So that's the bit, that's the 0 degrees that we want to keep people on, because if anyone's 1 degree off that, they will end up in a different place from where we want them to be. And so in a second session, we were taken through an A3, pretty standard lean improvement methodology, to understand what the challenge was with our people. And North Mid had been challenged with its staff survey for many years, and there had been action plan after action plan after action plan to improve it. But actually, once we defined what the problem was, which meant we had to get into what did we mean by our true north. So we wanted to feel inclusive, so we needed people to feel they belonged, and we wanted people to strive to improve, so they had to be able to contribute. And then we went and really drilled into the data in our staff survey, which you can see in the bottom left there. And that high-level thematic analysis demonstrated that the 2 key drivers of deterioration in our staff survey were equality, diversity, and inclusion, and safe environment for bullying and harassment, which meant we could set our targets to say that we wanted to focus on just those things. So that meant that when any work we took forward for staff survey with our divisions and our teams beyond divisions had to focus on those areas. So this forced us to go to the data. And I think that is one of the things about strategy deployment, is that it means you have to get away from the warm words into the hard data, because that's the only way you get through the catchball process, which I will touch on. In terms of the other work, then we were sort of shown this gift from Western, which I think was developed through with Russ and Kim and teams, but it was a filter through which we could start putting our priorities. And the big key on this filter was, what is that central box? What is the level of impact on the delivery of our true north? So if people had pet projects that weren't going to contribute to one of those 5 true norths, you can see it would go into the deselect box. This was one of the hardest days we spent together as an exec team, because it really forced people to think about, is this stuff we're doing actually going to affect our true north? Is it going to deliver our strategy, or is it doing something else? The only exception to that is that box on the left. Is it a statutory or regulatory requirement, in which case it had to go through. And so by the end of that day, this was just an example of it, all done with post-it notes, great QI process. CQC improvement plan was our mission critical. We had some really important stuff that would contribute to our true norths, but we put our corporate services review with the ICS into a weight bucket. And actually the thing that our director of strategy was really obsessed with, which was building a multi-story car park, actually we deselected it because it wasn't helpful to meeting our true north priorities. It was not that simple, but it was a really helpful process to get to at the end of the day. And that meant that we ended up with this output, which showed us our strategic goals. It gave us some breakthrough objectives, which I'm going to touch on shortly with the move I made to UH Sussex. We had strategic initiatives and corporate projects. So within 1 page, we were able to define with our teams what our work would look like over the next year to 3 years. And that actually was really important, because our divisions suddenly thought, right, this is containable, this is doable, we can see the boundaries of this, and that then actually gave them the confidence to do that. Now, by the time we got to that point at North Mid, Marianne invited me to make the move to UH Sussex and to take on the patient first program as Pete was going to move on. So I just want to touch on a little bit. I'll go back over some of the things I've just said really briefly, and I will keep to time, I promise, Emma. So let's just come back to the principle of true north. They're precise, concise, and a universal set of ideas. They should be aspirational, what we should do, not what we can do. They really, they almost need to be unachievable, but you need to keep striving for them. They need to sit in the horizon and keep you honest on that direction of travel, a state of perfection that you should be continually striving towards. And that lens is the lens through which you can then set objectives. And when you get into conversations with your teams, when you're having disagreements, you can come back to that. Is this really helping us move towards our true north? The breakthrough objectives, which are those measures attached to each of the true norths that will turn the dial. So these are the things that if you get these moving in the right direction, then other things will be dragged up with them. And this is a really helpful way of framing those priorities with your organization. And for those people who are sort of lean enthusiasts, they should focus on the 3 wastes. So overburden, unwarranted variation, wasted time, energy, money, product. You can see some of the UH Sussex breakthrough objectives there. And then every year we get into a process called catchball. And this is one of the key bits of strategy deployment for me, because it becomes a really honest conversation. So instead of just cascading what we want as the trust board down the organization, at each level, people will have the true norths and the breakthrough objectives and then set at their own objectives with those lenses in mind. So there will be suggestions from the board to the divisions will make suggestions back to the board, and we will negotiate and we will talk to each other like adults, and we will agree what those priorities look like. And the output of that is a really simple scorecard. So this is our specialist division scorecard. And you can see in the top bit, the true north goals and targets, which have been negotiated to a division level. So for example, for the specialist service divisions, we can talk about what those true north goals mean for that division. For the breakthrough objectives, what does it mean for the division? And then the division has come up with its own objectives as well. Some of these are driver metrics. They're the ones we're going to talk about a lot as we have conversations through the year. Others are watch metrics that we're not going to prioritize in our conversations, but if things go off, we will see and we'll be able to get into conversations about them. So we meet monthly, and a divisional SDR is in place of our traditional performance reviews. So for those of you that have more vindictive old-fashioned coups who do performance reviews that are along the lines of read my mind or I'll screw you over type things, I know that can't possibly happen in the NHS. The conversation in an SDR should be entirely predictable because there are business rules on the scorecard. We're just flipping over actually from the scorecard that you saw to using SPC. And basically the signals will trigger when you have to have a conversation. So there are 3 indicators in SPC which will trigger either a countermeasure summary, which is a really short piece of work, and Kim mentioned that will show how the team have thought through something, or a structured verbal update. And you can see on that slide, there are some pretty standard questions that I, as the chair of the SDR, will ask the division if a countermeasure summary or a structured verbal update has been triggered. And that isn't a why isn't this delivering, but it's about what is the aim, how are you fixing it, what's going on, when do you expect to see the improvement, is there any help or support required? So this turns into a more coaching style review than a traditional performance review. And this is always my little prompt for how you run a divisional SDR. So if the team don't seem to have explored the root cause, we can talk about a 5 whys approach. Was there a time when it didn't arise? What are the other potential reasons? If someone's stuck in analysis paralysis, actually, have you done a Pareto? What's your biggest contributor here? What's the bit we could focus on? If they've put a solution in, but it's not working, my favorite question in divisional SDR, the one that they know they've got to come up with an answer for, is, have you developed standard work? Have we developed the standard way of doing this? Is everyone trained? How do you know they were using the standard work? What can you learn from the fact it's not gone wrong? And this is about using supportive continuous improvement in order to get to the solution, not you need to go away and make it better. So just to conclude, I have found that strategy deployment is a really helpful management method to ensure that the organization's strategy can be executed across the whole hierarchy of the organization. An integral part of strategy deployment is using the tools of continuous improvement, but they're not the same thing. And we were talking in our little breakout group about, what can people do to sort of replicate this in their area. Those tools are key, but actually it's a bit bigger than that. If it's implemented effectively, it forces the leadership team to come up with a vision and list of breakthrough objectives, to create those complementary goals and to get agreement on it so that you don't keep coming back and changing the conditions under which your teams are working. And I think it creates the space to have important improvement conversations. I'm going to finish on the book I'm reading at the moment, James Clear, Atomic Habits. If you're not read it, you really should. It's really good. He's got a saying that says, you do not rise to the level of your goals or ambitions, you fall to the level of your systems. That for me is exactly what this is about. You put the systems in to ensure that you can reach up to your goals. And you have to practice it and you have to keep doing it. And that's Gary Player, who plays golf, and his most famous saying, which was, the harder I practice, the luckier I get. So if people want to know how Western got to outstanding, it wasn't luck, but it was a lot of work on doing some standard things over and over again and getting them better and better. And I shall shut up and go over to the
Great, thank you,
discussion.
Andy. Sorry to rush you on time, but thank you very, very much for that. So we're going to do a little bit of a discussion, but because of time, probably not as much as you'd like, but please put your questions in the chat. And as a follow-up to the webinar, we may well see if we can answer some of those questions as well as part of our follow-up. So I'm going to hand you over to Francis, who's going to hold the panel discussion with the other guests.
Yeah, thanks, Emma. And yeah, just to confirm that, we will go through the chat. There's certainly some themes around setting up process improvement teams. What does it take for internal resources, and some of the learning there, and then particularly some connections through to different improvement methods. So we will respond to those and think about how we can share that. So I think there's really just the key theme that was coming through all of the questions, or a number of them, was about, so what? So how do we get started? Actually, how does an executive team or a leadership team start on this? Because we can book the room to be able to do the work, but actually maybe what needs to happen to be able to do that. And if you're not in a position of being an exec leader or in that influential position, what does that mean that we might be able to do? And how could we be applying these principles in our work? And what that would look like. And if it's possible to get a couple of minutes from each of you on that, that would be great. And I'm just going to go around my screen, and Kim, if we could go to you first.
Well, I think, as I said earlier, it's critical if you want to transform your organization. It has to be led by the CEO and the chief medical officer. They have to jointly say, this is the way we're going to do business, or it doesn't become fully transformational. However, we recognize some people want to practice some of this learning within their units. And so if you decide as a quality leader that you want to do that, pick one unit, make it what we would call a model cell, which is where you practice, set up what your true north might look like. What would your key initiatives look like? Make it visual on a huddle board. Play catch ball with your team and say, how can we do this? What would you guys think would work better? What do you know that I don't know? Go observe processes, exhibit the behaviors that Russ showed on my favorite slide, the align and the enable principles, using the tools. So you can begin to create pull from other areas if they see you're being successful. Have a scorecard like Andy showed. Actually, I loved Andy's presentation, so thank you, Andy. You really demonstrated all of what Russ and I had talked about in a very concrete way, but try one thing at a time. Don't come in and say, I'm going to transform everything, because you can't do it from the middle. Don't set yourself up for that kind of a failure mode.
Thank you, Kim. Russ, have you got anything to add to that?
I think there's something about inertia in the NHS as well, and it sort of links to that. So of course, when we do presentations like this, we talk about the whole and these sort of almost what feel like fairly unobtainable destinations that we should all sort of feel like we need to take one step and we're there. And actually, there's something that Kim often says, which don't make perfect the enemy of good. So there is something that you can start tomorrow that will just make it better, whether it's using the examples that Kim gave, that we can all actually adopt this in our own personal work, our own personal behaviors, the way that we lead our local teams and all the rest of it. and we can start to sort of make improvements and kind of actually learn how these tools apply and these methods apply to us personally, which then might make it easier for us to explain and to kind of engage others more senior than us about how to go on the journey. I think there is the second half of that, though, is that if you are going to get to the places that Andy and Kim were describing, the chief exec has to go on that journey themselves. I don't think there are any shortcuts to that. And all the examples that, if you look right the way back through history, whether it is through Theta Care with John, with Marianne, with Kim and others, it's very much about the chief exec going from knowing conceptually to practicing personally all of the things that we're talking about here today. And that is when you start to crash through the things that are always inevitably going to knock you off course as you go.
Great, thank you. Now, Andy, I'm aware we've just got a couple of minutes left in this webinar, and your talk really helped us wrap up kind of the reality and the experience of doing this. So if there's anything that you wanted to add before we hand back to Emma to bring us to a close.
Well, just really briefly, I suppose on the converse, there are still reasonably large pockets of UH Sussex that don't do this very well, but that's kind of not the point. It's not perfect everywhere, and actually that bit that Russ has just said about I have to go out and practice it and go out and be curious as to why and to help people through it. So it absolutely is about not making perfect the enemy of the good. It's like everything, you have to start somewhere. Running a marathon starts with one step, and it is a marathon and not a sprint, and it will go wrong. And just learn from that. That's a learning opportunity, and I think that's the point at which you can just try this out. You can set up a scorecard with 2 sets of metrics, give it a go, see what comes out of it.
Great, thank you, Andy, and thanks Kim and Russ for that, and thank you for submitting all of the questions, everybody on the webinar. We will use them to shape the thinking going forward. Emma.
Okay, just finally for everyone, there's a couple of things. We'd appreciate some feedback through the chat if you could give it us, or use the Twitter hashtag if you wanted to. So please pop that in the chat for us. And then I just want to let you know about the 2 webinars that are coming up after this. So on the 25th of May, we're going to be looking at how you do this daily continuous improvement. And we've got some people from different places across the country who've got some real sort of mechanisms for visual management, daily control, process improvement, continuous improvement. So we'll learn from them. And then the final webinar in this series will all be about leadership. And we touched on it, haven't we, about chief executives and teams and things like that. But this will be really learning from some organisations who've been walking the walk and talking the talk. And we'll be able to find out what are some of the cultural and leadership behaviours and principles that are needed to put this in place. So that's us. We're going to launch a poll any minute now, which we'd like you to complete before you leave. And just want to say huge thank you to everybody. Let me stop sharing for a second. I just want to say thank you to our panel because you've done a fabulous job. It's been lovely to have you, and thank you, particularly Kim, for joining us from so early in the morning. So thank you and goodbye, and please do your poll. Thank you.